episode number 171 of the Cozy Corner of Cinema, being recorded on Wednesday, July 9th, 2025 at 11:20 p.m. The days are getting warmer and warmer, and a level of exhaustion is definitely felt. I tell you, I was out there grilling the other day. It was a beautiful day to grill. You know, it was on the 4th of July. The sun was beating down. It was a good temperature, not too hot. But boy, oh boy, you're out there in the sun, and by the time we got in there, it was like, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I made the mistake of putting on a film that, I was watching an Ozu film, and, Ozu's a filmmaker, makes very quiet, very contemplative films, and you really kind of got to be in the mood for them, I feel. About 20 minutes in, I just felt myself nodding off, and I wasn't able to give the full appreciation to that film as I was would have been able to if I was fully awake. I had to wake up, and I woke up and I had to find the point where I fell asleep at. It makes no indication of the quality of that film. It's my own kind of circumstances that led me to that point. Oftentimes I feel like films or any kind of artistic medium need to be experienced in a certain context. So, let's say you listen to an album, where you watched a film and you really weren't in a very good mood, or something went wrong that day or anything like that, and you find yourself kind of overly critical or negative on something, then you come back to it later and you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of why it's good to kind of let some of these things sort of age, man. It's like whiskey, or any kind of fine wine ages well over time. I don't think whiskey actually ages well over time. I think it's more wine, but whatever. I don't really know much about that kind of stuff. But either way, episode number 171. I hope you all are doing very well. Last week I was talking about, we're at the halfway point of the year, and really kind of wanted to be fully aware of where we are going forward for the rest of the year, of what we hope to accomplish and what we want to continually pursue going forward with our artistic endeavors, whatever that may be. Even with the last episode, I was talking about so many films that were going so rapid fire. I'm just trying to get some of these films out in a timely manner allotted. And there were still some films that were left behind in the pack, so I'm not going to go through them or anything like that. But there still are some that I just can't, just don't have the time to get to that. Even though a lot of the films I had mentioned, there was more to say about them, but for the time, I didn't want to do a whole kind of big episode or anything like that. When the Oscar Best Picture kind of nominations were announced, that's one thing. I had a lot to say about each film. The 9 that I had seen at that time, and the one that I hadn't seen until after I recorded that. So now I've seen all 10, but I didn't want to rush through those. I didn't, I tried to record that once, trying to, kind of be kind of fast paced with it, and I realized I was too far into it to properly talk about the other 9. So I didn't want to do that, because, a lot of work goes into these films, man. You don't want to be brushing them off, off to the side, where it's oh, this is good, this is bad, You kind of want to have more kind of critical thinking, and kind of look at it in something far more, I wouldn't even say permanent, but far more kind of substantially. So it's not just you watch a film and you ask Joe Schmo about it, and it's just kind of well, what do you think about it? Oh, it was good. It was bad. It's sort of well, what was good about it? What was bad about it? You don't got to give an essay or anything like that. You don't have to give a whole kind of, sort of life-affirming sort of, reply to it. But it's sort of at the same time, you also kind of want to have some sort of context as to the merits or the kind of marks that you give a film, or something along those lines, regardless of whatever that may be, and regardless if one believes, regardless if one agrees with you, I should say, not believes, not a situation like that. But anyways, there are other films I would have liked to have mentioned, and should they come up, they will be mentioned, but otherwise, I'm not going to ramble on all day about the 2025 films so far. So either way, we'll put that aside for now. But I hope that you guys, listened to that episode and maybe walked away with some films that, you'd maybe not been aware of previously, or ones they wanted to write down for contextual kind of viewing, or maybe you just enjoy the talk, and that's totally fine too. There's nothing wrong with how you guys absorb these episodes if you listen at all. If you do listen, Thank you. I appreciate it. Your time is greatly appreciated. Taking the time. There's so many shows, podcasts, whatever, interviews, videos, audiobooks that you could be out there listening to this. So if you're spending the time to actually kind of sit down and listen to me ramble on about these films. And that's what I'm doing. I'm really just kind of rambling. I appreciate it sincerely to all you guys, however many of you. I don't care. I said it from the start. I'm not. I do the show for myself. If one person listens, great. If 1,000 people listen, great. If no one listens, well, that's fine too. I don't really care too much. It's just sort of like getting a memes out there. Kind of talking about these films that I like to talk about. Maybe it'll reach an audience, maybe they won't. But either way, I can't say I didn't try. But it was interesting this week to see that Vinegar Syndrome are putting out Elaine May's film, A New Leaf, as part of the Cinematograph line of films, which has been an interesting line of films, undoubtedly. Interesting, maybe for better, maybe for worse. It's been interesting. Don't mean to say that word again, but it's been fascinating, I should say. Let me use that word instead. To talk to some acquaintances about the Cinematograph line and some, positives, some negatives we've been saying about it. But either way, A New Leaf is one that I've been waiting for a good release for a while. I'd watched this film originally many years ago, back on Turner Classic Movies. I recorded it. I'm pretty sure it was Turner Classic Movies. See, it's been so long that I now struggle to remember, because I remember distinctly that I was getting this mixed up with The Late Show with, oh boy, that wasn't Lily Tomlin in the film. It's the actress I always get mixed up with Lily Tomlin. No, it is Lily Tomlin. Okay, who was I thinking of then? Yeah, Lily Tomlin and Art Carney. For whatever reason, I would always get this film and A New Leaf mixed up. I think the posters may have reminded me of it. I really don't know. But no, A New Leaf, 1971. You got Walter Matthau in the film and Elaine May. And it's just a really good film. Elaine May is just one of my favorite filmmakers. And it's so fascinating to kind of talk about when, the great sort of, American filmmakers. Because Elaine May really had a short directed filmography. She didn't have many films under her belt. She had 4, I would say, good films, man. And you might be, after I just said that, you may be thinking like 4? That's insane, man. You sure you don't mean 3? And no, I mean 4, because she directed A New Leaf in 1971, and then my favorite of her work, The Heartbreak Kid, from 1972. And then she did Mikey and Nickey in 1976. And I think I might actually, I don't know if I have that film. I can't see if I do. I don't think, do I? Maybe I don't own it. I should buy that film. Yeah, I don't see it. I guess I thought I did. And then 1987, she does Ishtar, at one point considered to be one of the worst films ever made. It was often the butt of a joke. Ishtar, Warren Beatty, Dustin Hoffman, Isabella Gianni. And it's one that I really kind of question the harsh kind of negative reaction that a film like that received. It was the butt of a joke. Everyone was kind of like, oh, Ishtar, Ishtar. And it's one where, people say like, oh, so bad it's good, this and that. And to me, it doesn't even fall under that. To me, it's just a silly kind of comedy. This idea of it being this awful film or something egregiously bad, I have kind of chalked up to, at this point, being more so in the pop culture sort of milieu of sort of like, well, the Ishtar is kind of synonymous with these disasters of movies, of just being terrible films. And to me, I don't see that at all. I don't think it's particularly memorable, but if its reputation didn't precede it, I do think that it would have been more of an oddity than anything else, in terms of, you have Elaine May, who's a really strong and talented filmmaker, great at directing actors, getting really good performances out of them. I think back to like Mikey and Nickey with John Cassavetes, and Is it Peter Falk in that movie? My memory is not. My memory is failing me these days. I'm like, man, who was in that movie? And then I'm done recording. I'm like, oh, of course it was yeah. I'm sorry, it was Peter Falk in that as well. Ironically, another Cassavetes kind of regular, but just their dynamic is so good in the film. But yeah, Ishtar, it's kind of what I was talking about a little while ago with Freddy Got Fingered. At least I think I talked about it here. Sometimes I forget who, I talk about certain films with, but with Freddy Got Fingered, it's one of these films that at one point was considered like one of the worst films ever and, a disaster. And then, that's a film that has gotten such a kind of cultural sort of reevaluation as this really absurd, extreme kind of comedy that was so different than a lot of the studio fare that was coming out around that time. A lot of the generic, whether or not they were good, was in the eye of the beholder. But a lot of these generic, kind of gross out, late '90s, early 2000s sort of comedies that was like playing it safe but still being kind of gross. And that was one that was so in the opposite direction of just being totally gross out, totally wild and extreme. Just these everybody playing it up to 11. That it was ultimately rejected by critics, by audiences. But now you see it pop up on the Criterion channel, and people have a certain unironic sort of reverence for the film. And it's a film that I watch now, and humor is so subjective, so it's so hard to recommend films, comedies I should say. But it's one of the funniest films I've ever seen, and it shouldn't, it's not one that's normally my kind of film. I'm not into really big, loud, kind of bombastic comedy like that, but for whatever reason, I was just really into that film, and I found it to be just incredibly humorous. But it's just funny how now, Ishtar has kind of, I don't think it's gotten quite to that kind of cultural level as Freddy Got Fingered. I think in part because, I think a lot of younger people are probably discovering Freddy Got Fingered, on the Criterion channel or hearing about it online. Ishtar doesn't have the quite the notoriety as that film does. I think more so the fact that it's more just kind of a traditional kind of dumb comedy, that it has fallen to the wayside of nothing too big. But yeah, I mean, when, Indicator, they were going to put out Ishtar a couple of years ago on Blu Ray, but I think it's a licensing issue where I forgot who put it out originally. It was, I don't know if it was Warner Brothers or not. Of course, trying to find information while I am recording is going to be just the death knell of what I am trying to find. Let's see, because I want to find what company put this out. And that was Columbia, but I don't know who owns the rights to it now. But either way, for whatever reason, this was, this was put aside, not, and not released. That Blu-ray got announced. They said, no way, Jose. And it's a shame, because I do think that if this film got a proper re-release, on Blu-ray, on 4K, whatever, that I think that the tides can kind of shift more. And you could say to that, well, Dan, Freddy Got Fingered doesn't have a boutique, nice Blu-ray release, and the tides have still shifted. And yes, that is correct. But it does kind of go to what I'm aiming at before, or what I was talking about before, which is that I think Ishtar is, unless you're aware of these kinds of films or aware of a filmmaker like Elaine May, I don't think that Ishtar is as in the general kind of conversation, even amongst younger kind of film fans, than something like Freddy Got Fingered, because of the reasonings of just the content is not as out there. But no, but Elaine May is just such a wonderful and talented filmmaker, and I really want to read that book. That I've already heard good things about, and actually they were selling Vinegar Syndrome. We're selling that alongside the release of A New Leaf, which was Miss May Does Not Exist, and I believe is a biography on Elaine May, because Ishtar was her last directed film from 1987. She would go on to write myriad other works, including The Birdcage, probably being her most famous or most noteworthy of the bunch. Primary Colors with John Travolta. Because, I mean, even before then, she had written some films like Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, and as uncredited work on Tootsie. And I don't know what the uncredited work entails in that, but either way, she was, and still is really a talented sort of writer. So the fact of the matter is that I think that book is going to provide some real clarity, because even I myself am curious what exactly happened after Ishtar in terms of maybe not wanting to head in that direction. Because the Heartbreak Kid, especially, I think is one of the strongest films of the 1970s, and it's one that I think plenty of people are fully aware of. It got a remake in 2007 with Ben Stiller, and people know about that. And I remember when I saw that back in 2007, I wasn't even aware of. I was aware there was a remake, but I wasn't aware of not only really much about the original, but how strongly the film is. I mean, the film now online is easily accessible. Anyone can watch it. But when I was watching it this time, or when I watched it last, I should say, it was such a sharp screenplay. It was such a well-acted screenplay. And I think one of the big things that really kind of stood out for me, not only in context of the remake, which I only vaguely remember. I mean, I last saw it in 2007, 2008. I didn't see it theatrically. I saw it when it was on DVD. I think I actually rented it from the Redbox when they still have those, which is funny now because you still see plenty of those hanging up around, but they're not doing them anymore. But I think one of the main things that really kind of drew me to the original film after I had seen it was the moral ambiguity of a character like Lenny, played by one of my favorite actors, Charles Grodin. And when I say moral ambiguity, I think filmmakers now, or at least there's a general consensus now, that there's a strong hold on making a protagonist likable. And I've always been of the mindset, the character doesn't need to be likable, but he needs to be engaging. So even if I'm not on their side for what they're doing, I still have to be engaged with that. And I see sometimes, the criticism of like, oh, this character, this main character was a jerk, and this and that. And it's one thing where, you question if the writer and director or not are aware of what kind of character they're making. But in this case, it's very aware and it's very apparent of the sort of attitude and the sort of person, excuse me, I'm sorry, person that this character Lenny is, because he's a character who is just completely ridiculous. He's on his honeymoon with his new wife, played by Jeannie Berlin, and things exactly aren't quite vibing. And one of the things as well I noticed with this film, and I shouldn't even be comparing it to the remake, because I mean my memory is gonna fail me here. And actually, let me get a sip of this so my throat doesn't dry out too much. But with the remake, I remember they went really out of their way to make Malin Ackerman's character really unbearable, really just over the top, exaggerated. But even still, you kind of wonder. It's like, they want us to be on Ben Stiller's side, but it's like, the character never pulls her aside and says like, hey, we're in a new relationship. We just got married. Let's talk about things that we like or don't like, and then you can go from there. Maybe you make her exaggerated. That's whatever. That's your prerogative. But here, what I like is that, he's not really he's not really on the same wavelength as Jeannie Berlin, but she's not doing anything really too bad. I mean, she's really just kind of being her own person. It's really Lenny that can't get on board with her. So the fact that when he sees Sybil Shepherd's character, on one hand, Sybil Shepherd, beautiful actress, in the 70s, all those, the 70s and 80s, all those great Bogdanovich films, of course, Taxi Driver and all that, great, that's all good and all that, but when he actually sees her, it's like, yeah, the attraction is one thing, but we're also laughing because of how ridiculous it is. He's making up all these excuses to, instead of simply talking to his wife and just saying, you got to work things out, but making up these excuses to get closer to Sybil Shepherd's character is just so hysterical. And I think in part of that, comes to one of the strongest sequences in the film. Well, there's two strong sequences. One is the ending, unquestionably. I think the ending is just a great. If there was ever a way to wrap up the whole film in like one shot, it's the ending of the film. It does it perfectly. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it perfectly wraps up the film, man. There's the great scene involving, and I don't really want to spoil it, but involving Lenny getting Janine geez Louise, Slate guys, bear with me. Janine Berlin getting her some pie, and how funny that is. And I don't want to get into the whole thing of it, but you know, and when Lenny is talking to Sybil Shepherd's father, and he's going out of his way saying, "I don't like you. What are you doing? You're married." You know, it's such a smartly written comedy. The way that Elaine May writes these characters, and I should also say, I'm sorry, she's another writer on this one. This is Bruce J. Friedman and Neil Simon. I thought this was based off something else, but I don't know if I am correct about that. You'll have to bear with me for just a moment. Okay, so Bruce J. Friedman is the writer of the story A Change of Plan. Now, what story that entails from, I don't know. But Neil Simon is a well-known writer, of course. So he is primarily the one. He's also a playwright, and he is the one primarily responsible for the screenplay of this. But anyways, it's just the way, I should say, maybe not that she writes the characters, but the way that she handles the characters. They're so enjoyable to watch, and they're so much fun to watch. And it's a shame that this is one that I don't suspect will be getting any kind of new release at any point in the near future. This is one that is unfortunately kind of caught in a legal sort of battle. Smarter people than I, or I should say more knowledgeable people than I, can kind of give more specifics into the situation involving the legality of this. But it's something about this dentist company owning the rights to this film, including some other works, that makes this a little tricky. Now, when it comes to an international release, I think that at this point, I'm kind of at the point. I have more faith in international releases than I am with domestic releases, purely because of the legalities of it. It feels like there have been more international releases of films that I was like, whoa, you know, I didn't think that was going to happen in the States. I think back to like Dawn of the Dead getting that second sight release, or you know what's funny is that The Idiots from Lars von Trier has I believe it cures on Blu Ray that is unedited, because I've seen some versions of that film where the nudity was censored, and I believe it might actually be on Mubi at the time of this recording, unedited. But I know Dogville as well has a Blu Ray. And you know, just certain films that I think if you're a collector of any kind of physical media, having a region-free player, I found is really been like a weight off your shoulder. Not that you're stressing about, oh man, this film, but it's more about knowing and having the ability to import anything you want. There is no hesitation. There is no sort of doubt that if a film has been released on Blu-ray, it is yours to stream. So, like, for example, you know, I'm not holding my breath for a domestic release of Dawn of the Dead or The Idiots. You know, I know at Dawn of the Dead that Synapse had tried to, they were close to actually being the ones to distribute the film, but a deal fell through in terms of the wording of the contract, according to them. And as for The Idiots, I mean, if it's on Mubi, I don't know what the home media rights are, but I would be perfectly fine if they released that. I mean, they released The Kingdom, all three parts of that, on Blu-ray, and I've only seen the first part of that, which is great. And I've heard that the newest one is really exceptional as well. But you know, I'll get to those in due time. But yeah, it's all about just, you know, being aware of these films getting releases. You know, if the Heartbreak Kid gets a a Blu-ray gets any kind of release overseas, and it's actually good enough quality, then I'll pick it up. Because Japan as well, they're releasing a lot of stuff, but the quality was like DVD quality, man. I remember when they released Monty Hellman's Cockfighter, and it was one of these where I was hearing not great reviews of the Blu-ray. I did end up importing the Japanese Blu-ray of George Romero's Martin. And that didn't look much better than a traditional DVD. But then Martin gets that Second Sight 4K, and it looks fantastic, And then with Cockfighter, I ended up buying, because I never bought the Japanese version, I ended up buying the domestic Shout Factory website exclusive release. And boy, oh boy, did I feel like I could have been fine with the Japanese release if it had been cheaper, because there really was not much restoration done with that. But either way, it's just nice to have. But I'm kind of trailing off now. I went from Elaine May to these damn films on Blu-ray, man. It's late at night, forgive a guy. But either way, so yeah, a new Leaf will be picked up at some point. A revisit will be in order. And Mikey Nickey is still so fresh, it's still so fresh in my mind that I can, confidently say it's just one of, just a really, really well done, exceptional film. Cassavetes is somebody who I have always been more interested in him as an actor than I am a filmmaker, which may be blasphemous to say that people are very passionate about Cassavetes' work, and I respect that, man. Cassavetes is a filmmaker who I often struggle to kind of relate to and to click with. But I find him to be such a wonderful filmmaker. And I also find him, to be such a wonderful actor. But I also find him to be very inspirational. Anybody who really wants to get into independent filmmaking, just sort of the lengths that he had to go to. Him being an actor and being reading about him on the set of The Dirty Dozen and writing the screenplay to... Oh my God, I forgot what film he was writing while he was on the set of The Dirty Dozen. He was trying to get funding, maybe. It was. Maybe Faces, because that was Faces 72? Or am I getting the year wrong about that? I think I might be getting the year wrong about that. Faces was 68. Oh my gosh, I was completely wrong. So maybe, you know what? It had to have been Faces then, because if The Dirty Dozen was 67, then there we go, yeah. But yeah, it helps when you have a really talented filmmaker like Elaine May. You have really exceptional actors like John Cassavetes, Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, Peter Falk, Walter Matthau. And Elaine May is a solid actor in her own right. It all comes together, man. So it's great to see this film get a re-release, or it's great to see this film get released. Hopefully it brings it up more in the general kind of conversation. Maybe people who haven't seen the film or maybe aren't familiar with Elaine May's work. Maybe they watch this and they're like, oh man, I gotta check out Mikey and Nickey and the Heartbreak Kid and Ishtar, and that's sort of how films are sort of brought into a new life. It's not just about whatever is you're scrolling on Netflix or Hulu or Canopy or any of these streaming services. It's like, oh well, this film popped up, so that's the film of the week, and then by next week it'll be gone. It's when you see people talking about these films and seeing new Blu-rays and seeing them brought to the general conversation that these films bring on a whole new life. So, films that maybe weren't popular 20 years ago, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, there's a new social media trend, or not a trend, hey, a new social media thing. People are watching this film from whenever, and they're, breathing new life into it, and that's just so wonderful to see. So, we raise our glasses to the great Elaine May. We thank her for all her dedication, all the wonderful films she has given us, and we will continue to keep her legacy and her work alive. And I think that's a proper wrap-up to this episode. I am so tired right now. Maybe you can hear it in my voice. I don't know. But either way, guys, it's July. It is the time to make our dreams come true. So why not go for it, put our best foot forward, start the day off with our heads held high, our boots to the ground, because every day is such a gift and we don't want to take it for granted. So to all of you who have been listening, or if this is your first time listening, or maybe you skimmed through and this happened to be the part that you clicked on, thank you for taking the time to listen. All the best until next time, and take care.